So I decided to do some more sun stuff mainly. I'm going to start out reading from Genesis 1, Common English Bible. And it's pretty interesting. A lot of times people just gloss over stuff, but there's a purpose to the sun, moon, and stars, which I think standard cosmology, especially among Christians, is brushed aside, and it shouldn't be. This is the Common English Bible, and I don't agree totally with every translation in every spot, but I think I like the wording of this, so I'm going to use that one. And it says, when God began to create the heavens and the earth was without shape or form. It was dark over the deep sea, and God's wind swept over the waters, which is different than most versions say the Spirit of God. But I don't know as much about Hebrew, but in Greek, the word pneumos is used for wind, spirit, air. I mean, well, there is a separate word for air, and it's actually air, but anyway, wind or spirit, and you can't tell which it is by the context here. So who's to say? I don't think either translation is superior to the other, but we all know God has a spirit and is a spirit, and you can take it either way. Anyhow, verse 3, and God said, let there be light, and so light appeared. God said, so he's speaking things into existence. God saw how good the light was. God separated the light from the darkness. God named the light day and the darkness night. There was evening and there was morning the first day. And this is why, as young earth creationists, we've always made a point of noticing that the text says over and over, evening, morning, day one, evening, morning, day two. And there's just no way to interpret that as vast ages. And in fact, later on in the giving of the Ten Commandments, the reason for honoring the Sabbath day is because it was the day of God's rest. And if this was referring to an epoch or, thousands of years or whatever, that wouldn't make any sense at all. And so I think there's a very good case for literal, what we would call solar days. That is to say, a cycle of evening and morning, and that the burden of proof for otherwise rests on other people. And I've, in all my years, never seen a good argument against it. Going on to verse 6, God said, let there be a dome in the middle of the waters to separate the waters from each other. God made the dome and separated the waters under the dome from the waters above the dome. And it happened in that way. God named the dome sky. There was evening and there was morning the second day. God said, let the waters under the sky come together into one place so that the dry land can appear. And that's what happened. God named the dry land earth, and he named the gathered waters seas. God saw how good it was. God said, let the earth grow plants yielding seeds and fruit trees bearing fruit with seeds inside of it, each according to its kind throughout the earth. And that's what happened. The earth produced plant life, plants yielding seeds, each according to its kind, and seeds bearing fruit with seeds, and trees bearing fruit with seeds inside it, each according to its kind. God saw how good it was. There was evening and the morning the third day. God said, now this is the part I wanted to get to. God said, let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, even though there was already evening and morning. They will mark events, sacred seasons, days, and years. They will be lights in the dome of the sky to shine on the earth. That's their purpose. And I've heard speak about this says that the word seasons doesn't mean just telling what time of year it is. That's pretty easy to tell, but particular sacred seasons, meaning appointed times, appointed markings of certain things that God once marked. And there's been other people done very good videos that show how everything that God eventually gave to the Jews, to the priesthood of Levi, was prophetic and signified things. So God didn't just make up a bunch of silly rules. He had reasons for making them, and many layers of reasons, and one of those is prophetic. So at any rate, God's purpose for the sun, moon, and stars, which the standard cosmology of vastness can't account for, is that these are made for us from the perspective of the earth, and it makes it just no sense at all for these things to be huge and far away, and that we're some incomprehensibly small speck of dust in this vast nothingness that God apparently had to make that huge in order to light up the earth and tell the sacred times and appointments, when it makes no sense at all. So these are small and local, relatively speaking, and they are in the dome. Every translation, the original language, in the dome, okay, in the sky. So they have a location and they have a purpose. And of course, they provide lights, but they also tell events and sacred seasons, days, and years. God made the stars and two great lights, the larger light to rule over the day and the smaller light to rule over the night. God put them in the dome of the sky to shine on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. God saw how good it was. So that paragraph is showing in no uncertain terms the reason for the sun, moon, and stars. And I like how they rendered the thing about the stars, because most of them say, and he also made the stars. But I just like the way he worded it here, because see, where was that? God made the stars and two great lights. So the stars are not the bulk of the universe or the bulk of the sky. They're rather inconsequential when it comes to all these other purposes. That it's the sun and moon that rule, and the stars aren't even given a purpose. But we know, at least in hindsight, that they form constellations, and that these constellations have meaning. And there are books about the fact that they believe the constellations had other meanings before the modern zodiac. That, for example, they tell the story of salvation, a lion and a lamb, and all these, and all these things, and that they tell God's history. And I think there's a book called Gospel in the Stars. There's another one, I can't think of the title right now, but might want to look into that. At any rate, that's the purpose of these lights. Now you can go on to read about God making, starting on the fifth day, he put living things in the water and let birds fly above the earth up in the dome of the sky. So the same place the birds fly is the same place that the sun, moon, and stars are. The sun, moon, and stars are not outside of the dome. And I've said before in other hangouts that I think that the dome is multi-layered. It would have to be for lensing reasons. And so this doesn't mean there's nothing between us and the sun, moon, and stars. It just means that they are enclosed in the dome or firmament. And then the land produced living thing. God created sea life first, and then the land he produced, let the earth produce living things. That's an interesting phrase, let the earth produce it. And that, but then it says God made every kind of wildlife. So it's just a curious statement. And creatures that crawl on the ground, I know people think that's funny, that creeping things, it's not creepy things, but creeping things that crawl on the ground. He's just describing how they move. And so this is not a children's story, even though children can understand it. He's not being flippant or anything. God is just saying this is how things move in various places. And then at the very end, after making all this preparation, he puts man there, mankind, humanity. The word is Adamah, and it means red, which the soil apparently was red. The first person was made from the soil. And Adam was not a personal name. It was a description of humanity, this kind of being, as opposed to all the other kinds of beings that had been made. But this humanity was made from the ground, just like from the earth, just like all the earth, the non-sea creatures. So, but God added then in verse 26, let us make humanity in our image to resemble us, so that they may take charge of the fish of the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the earth, and all the crawling things on earth. God created humanity in God's own image. In the divine image, God created them. Male and female, God created them. So both male and female are given dominion over the earth. And that this is chapter 1. Some people try to make two different creation accounts, different gods. Those are very ignorant arguments. Anybody who studied it thoroughly knows that this is the manner of writing things, writing historical accounts in those days. And you started with your summary, and then you went into detail. And that's what chapter 2 is. And God blessed them, the male and female, and said, be fertile and multiply, fill the earth and master it, take charge of all these things. And then God said, I will give you the plants on the earth that yield seeds, and all the trees whose fruit produces seeds within it. These will be your food. To all wildlife, to all the birds in the sky, and everything crawling on the ground, to everything that breathes, I give all the green grasses for food. And that's what happened. So originally, everybody was pretty much a fruitarian, or, vegetables that you didn't have to dig for. It was only after the fall and the curse that people had to scratch the ground, as you can go on to read in Genesis 3, for their food. And then after the flood, things changed again, where God says, now I give you the animals for your food. So the flood is a whole different story, as far as, we can't judge the present, or we can't judge the past by the present, because the flood changed everything, and its purpose was to wipe everything out. And in channels like Wise Up, you can see how the so-called ancient artifacts bear this out, because he, in his videos, explains very technically, as an experienced builder with an eye for structural components, that a lot of what is considered carved out of stone was simply mineralized after being flooded and left there for a long time. The flood actually covered the earth for a year, and that this mineralization process ate away the things that were like plants and wood and things like that, and left the stone minerals that leached in to replace them in their shape. And that's why people look at that and go, wow, how did they do this? When in fact, it was the flood overcoming everything in the ancient world. And we're walking on the past, literally. And so when we see these things, some of it that's been exposed, we shouldn't be surprised that it looks like modern buildings, modern machinery. We have come full circle to the days of Noah. And he also goes on in that channel, the Wise Up channel, to say that some things look like sandbags. Water's rising, or other reasons. You can fill bags with sand, and then if they're flooded, the flood overtakes the sandbag walls and buildings, and the bags themselves rot away, and the sand is mineralized, you're going to be left with sandstone or something like it, limestone, and it looks poured. And this is why some people have thought about alien tech, and that people were able to melt rock. I'm not saying rock can't be melted. I'm just saying the most simple explanation, the Occam's razor approach, is probably the best. And I have to agree with Wise Up that this is either poured concrete, sandbags that mineralized, or wooden structures that mineralized. And there's a lot of evidence of machining too. They did do metal work. So we really have to apply common sense to these things and get people who have different disciplines, different training, and look at these things and not believe the mainstream dogma that everything in the ancient times was some kind of temple or shrine. That's what they like to do. And they like to paint those as primitive peoples who believed in gods. So it's the package deal. And there's a very good video by Truth is Stranger Than Fiction called, I think it's Ethereum or something like that, or Ethereal. I forget what he called it, but something like that. Go to Truth is Stranger Than Fiction and look up. It's a full-length 2-hour documentary. Anyway, God made people to rule the earth and made the earth to support people. And that includes the sky, the dome, with the sun, moon, and stars in it. So there you go. That's Genesis 1. Now, yesterday, I'm going to switch. Well, I hate to switch things too often, so I'm going to go over to the sundial page on Wiki. I know it's Wiki, but if you check stuff around and you find bits and pieces here and there that back it up, then Wiki has it all in one place. Why not use it? The thing about sundials is that understanding different kinds and understanding how they work can really tell us a lot about what's going on in the dome. And let me look at the chat here. Somebody actually showed up. Evolution theory follows the same events as the Bible in the most part with just longer time frame, but actually it doesn't. For example, let me go back there for a second. Let's look at the days in order. And he's light before the sun. is the first thing. Let there be light is the first thing that happened. The sun and moon were not, and stars were not created yet. So that's a difference. The second day is the formation of the dome sky, then sea life, then earth life. And so some of it's going to be the same. But then after all that, after the plants were made, God makes the sun. So that's a problem with evolutionary theory. And I don't believe in the day-age theory, the gap theory, any of those other things, because like I said at the start, evening and morning day 1, evening and morning day 2, and the 10 Commandments talking about the Sabbath day are referring to the 7-day week. That's how and when it was established. So I don't see any compatibility, and all the evolutionists would say the same thing. They'd say, no, Genesis does not match evolutionary theory, because, you know, the order is different in too many important places. So at any rate, let's go back to sundials. And it works by casting a shadow. Some are very, sophisticated that work by allowing a slit of light. But this happens to be a horizontal sundial. And I have one of those that my husband made me. And you have to do a fair amount of calculation to get the angles right for each hour, because they're not a uniform space when you have a horizontal one. And there are places you can go that'll print you out a handy spreadsheet of the calculations, so you don't have to go through all that, because it's trigonometry and most people don't want to do that. And then it would be time consuming, and why reinvent the wheel? So if you wanted to make one of these, that's what you would have to do. And I've shown pictures in other Hangouts of the one we have. I also have the kind I'm going to show a drawing about after I go through this article. At any rate, you can read through these things, read different kinds. Here's a vertical one, and you can see the angles change. They have to, just trigonometry. Here's another one, a combined analemic equatorial sundial in Ann Morrison Park in Boise, Idaho. All kinds of different sundials. And they talk a little bit about the mathematics behind it. And here's a little GIF animation of an equatorial sundial, which is the kind I'm going to show. It's the simplest, easiest kind to make, because you can make the dial every hour is 15 degrees apart. These are all 15-degree angles, and that's the simplest thing to do. It doesn't require a lot of calculation, just measuring 15 degrees. And so, but you have to tilt the whole dial is the only thing. It has to be tilted at a certain angle. I'll go into that. There's another one of these bow ones. This one happens to be near the equator. And I got into this because I was trying to find something that people kept telling me that you have to have special sundials at the equator. And I keep getting directed to equatorial sundials, which are not the same thing. So, and I got tired of looking. But basically the issue is that at the equator, you don't have a north or south component of it very much. I mean, it will vary a little bit with the solstices, but especially at the equinox, all you will have is a shadow that goes east and west, and the length of the shadow will change. So you would need something that simply measures the length of a shadow. And to measure it, you're going to have to know trigonometry, because you will have a right triangle with the vertical arm having a certain height, and then you measure the distance to the shadow and so forth. So you still have to do some math, but no more math than you would do for that one I showed earlier, the vertical one on the side of the wall with the angles that are not uniform. So here's the world's oldest sundial from Egypt's Valley of the Kings, circa, they say, 1500 BC. And you can see the angles are wider at the extremities, and they get closer together in the middle. It says in roughly 700 BC, who knows if that's accurate, but still, the Old Testament describes the sundial, the dial of Ahaz, mentioned in Isaiah 38 and 2 Kings 20. There are, I don't know which one that is, but there's incidents of people having a temple or palace with steps in it that the sun's shadow would go up or down. I forget which it was. So that's true enough. And here's a horizontal dial. You can go through that, but just look up sundial in Wikipedia and you'll have it. Southern hemisphere, of course, it points to the south instead of the north, and the east and west are reversed. So as they said here, it has to be reversed for the opposite latitude in the other hemisphere, because they believe in spheres. But and it doesn't match the clock because, as I've noticed, verified with my own sundials, I have two different kinds, that timeanddate.com is fairly accurate on that, where they say that the sun will the highest point of the sun in the movement of the day will not be at local clock time noon, or your time zone's noon, or even GMT noon, or anything like that. Sundials work locally only, and the height of the day, the solar noon at your location, will not be the same as at some other location very far away. So these are things all to consider. And of course, that the sundials don't care about saying like daylight savings time or summer times, they call it in the UK. So for example, at the solstice here in the northern hemisphere at my latitude, solar noon, when the shadow was at 12, was actually 1:42 or something like that, 1:41 in the afternoon. So, and it gets shorter, it gets earlier as the sun moves south. And I've been watching it all summer, and that's what it's been doing. So, whether it appears faster or slower than the local time, they even made a graph here for that, Arwen. And this is predictable stuff, and it's not like modern science is the only one who's been predicting this. People have been predicting it for thousands of years, as far as we know. And so whether solar noon is before or after clock noon or clock time, it's going to depend on the day of the year, if they got here on the x-axis here. And the minutes difference, positive or negative, is going to be on the y-axis. So that can be plotted, and once again, it has nothing to do with anybody trying to fool anybody, or dependent on modern science or the globe model or heliocentrism. It doesn't depend on any of that. So at any rate, there's all different kinds you can look at. There's a giant one. Arizona has a 62-foot or 19-meter gnomon. The gnomon is the shadow maker, possibly the largest in the U.S., but I mean, that's a huge sundial. But fixed axial gnomon, that's just a term we need to know if we're going to understand sundials. And here's more like another one that I have, and I'm going to show you a drawing of where the whole dial is angled. That's what an equatorial sundial is. If you look up equatorial, that's what you're going to find. You have to really dig to find anything that has to do with any kind of exceptions for sundials at the equator. At any rate, they have to point true north. I'll show you more about that. And the true north, again, as I've said before, is pointing to Polaris. That's the supposed rotational axis of the Earth, points toward Polaris. Also, the sun pretty much the same, a little bit different, supposedly. At any rate, a sundial in the northern hemisphere must have its gnomon pointing to Polaris. And Polaris is not the same as magnetic north, so you can't just use a compass. The best thing to do is find out when the solar noon is, when the sun's at its highest point, and set up your sundial so that the shadow of the gnomon falls directly on 12. That's probably the best way to do it. Pretty hard to line it up at night when there's no sun, and that's the only time when Polaris is up. Now I will show you also a magnetic declination map that'll explain how far off magnetic north is and for what part of the country you're in, and that this varies from year to year a little bit. So it gets complicated. It just is, and that doesn't mean there's something wrong or hidden or somebody's trying to pull something over on us. It just means some things can't be simplified. Just like, for example, the so-called simplest life form, a single cell organism, is extremely complex for us to understand. We don't get the simplest things about a lot of cells, and even the simplest cell, like I said, biologists, the more they dig, the more they find that they don't know anything, because life is very complicated. And so we can't just go by pure simplicity to say whether something is true, because we know that life exists and we can look at a cell under a microscope and it's still very complicated. So at any rate, sundials are cool just because they actually work and it makes you understand something about the movement of the sun overhead. So different angles, different imaginative ways of conveying where the sun is, either by its light or its shadow. There's some double sundials here. We got one on this wall, one on that wall. And you can see the angles are not uniform. So it gets interesting. And there's a polar sundial at Melbourne Planetarium. And they talk about Earth's rotation, but as anybody knows, who's paying attention, there is no difference mathematically or observationally between a stationary Earth with the dome or the things in the dome rotating over us or us rotating around the sun, except that, you know, we all know problems with the model. But I'm just saying mathematically, when it comes to sundials, the terminology and everything, and the reasons they give for why things move like they do is up for debate. But the fact that they move like they do is not, and that fact that these things can be calculated and predicted is not. So that's something we all have to understand. And there's another one. So, and there's some, you know, trigonometry calculations on how to calculate any given style or orientation of a sundial. There's another one, spherical sundials. You can have conical, cylindrical, other non-planar, plane being a flat surface sundials. Here's a universal one. This is interesting. This one, I forget, let's see if it says when that was made. It's an old one, but they hang this thing from a string and then they turn a dial to a particular location, and it is a working sundial that just hangs from a string. That would be particularly useful on a ship. You don't have a level surface, so you have to use, you know, to hang something from a string, just like what the builders would call a plumb bob, where they hang a weight on a string and it tells them what's vertical. And it doesn't lie. There's no technology involved. It's just, you know, you'll weight a rock, whatever, on a string. Usually people get something pointy, so it's easier to tell, you know, mark the line. But that's essentially how that's working, the principle behind it. You can get analemic sundials, has a vertical gnomon and hour markers in an ellipse. All kinds of sundials. You wouldn't believe how many sundials there are. And that they've been around for thousands of years. So this is not a modern technology thing. It's just modern technology is trying to claim that they invented, you know, some of this stuff, but they didn't. I mean, it never depended on thinking of the Earth as a spinning ball. That's the point there. There's all kinds of them, like I said here. There's an analemic one. You can see the kind of a distorted figure 8 there. A sundial cannon that's not very accurate, they said, that shoots off a little gunpowder at every hour. That's pretty interesting. And you can use it as a compass. I was telling somebody the other day that it's hard to line things up to true north during the day because you can't see Polaris. I said, well, just, you know, get a sundial and make sure that it's oriented to where the shadow is at noon when the sun is the highest elevation, and there you go. You've got Polaris. And so if you were out at, you know, at night or any time of the day or night and couldn't see Polaris for some reason, you would just go to your sundial that's already set up to face the right way, and there's your true north. So at any rate, there's a portable sundial, all sorts of things. Now let me share a different window here. I'm going to close that up and go to my drawings and present. Let me see if I can make that any bigger. There we go. This is something I drew up the other day, and this is the 15-degree sundial, and you put that with this point is where the gnomon is, and here's 6 to 12 if you go along this side, and lay it there, and point the gnomon towards true north, Polaris, and this line, this gnomon has to follow this angle, and then I show how you calculate these angles. You choose an arbitrary length for this opposite side. That's just what it's called in trigonometry. And from there, you can calculate what this side has to be, because this angle is determined by your latitude, whatever that angle, that degree is. And because this is a right triangle because it has a right angle, because of this as being a right triangle, it's going to, well, any triangle is going to add up to 180 degrees, which is a straight line. If you lay it flat, it's going to be 180. So if you fold it up, you still have to add up to 180 degrees. This is 90, so we got 90 left to work with. And so we take that has to be latitude plus this angle. These A and B angles have to add up to 90. So if you know your latitude, then you subtract that from 90 and you get the other angle, and then you know how to set your gnomon. So if you made a triangle of this shape, once you measured it, then just put your gnomon here. And the length of the gnomon they recommend is just short of half the radius of this sundial. So from here to here on the sundial, you want about halfway to be how far the gnomon sticks up over that. And the simplest ones are when you print out something like that. You can go to websites and print these out, and then it tells you to get your latitude and fold up the edges so this thing is stable and doesn't roll on that. And then you just stick a pencil, something through here at that angle, and you have a fairly accurate sundial. So this is how you calculate it. You choose the length of this opposite, and then you have to use tangent, which is you just get a calculator. There's plenty of those online too. The adjacent that you're trying to figure out is going to be your opposite, your radius of your sundial, over the tangent of this angle. So you just plug those numbers in, and for example, it worked out for if the opposite, the radius of your sundial is 6 inches, then the adjacent works out to almost exactly 5 inches. So I would if I had to make something out of wood or whatever, I would have a right angle. I would make this side 6 inches and that side 5, and then just go straight across, and there's my angle for my latitude. Up here, the ecliptic. What is that? It's the arc of the sun's path during the day. I've done several videos on the angle of the sun as it travels on a given day over a specific location, and that's called the ecliptic. And I'm going to show some pictures that illustrate that a little better, but I did notice that the rate of rise and fall of the sun changes throughout the day. So it goes, I noticed yesterday, I was just checking yesterday because I tracked the sun all day. The angle of rise was about 10 degrees per hour until it got to around the middle of the day, and then it slowed way down. It went 6 degrees, 4, 4, 6, and then back to 10. So it's curious that the sun seems to hang here in the middle of the day. So it rises and falls slower than when it's up at near its highest point, which is a curious thing and something we have to consider when we're figuring out how the sun moves. And if you watched any of my stuff on lensing and the double concave, we'd have to work this into that as well, because it isn't just the motion, it's the speed. And so the sun's path does not take a uniform speed over our head. And if we were thinking, well, it can be explained by perspective, such as if you're standing near a very long stretch of train tracks that are very straight and you see a train coming, that it'll appear to go faster and slower. But the problem is with perspective as an explanation is that the train appears when it's far away, whether it's coming or going, to be going very slowly. But when it's near you, it appears to be going very fast. This is the opposite of what the sun does. The sun appears faster at its extremities and slower when it's nearest you. So this cannot be a perspective issue as far as the sun's speed across the sky. So just things to consider, a little terminology when you're, if you look up anything about the sun, the altitude is the angle of the sun above the horizon. That is to say, if you're standing here on the ground and the sun is up here, then this is its altitude, okay? Or the top of this ecliptic here, that's its altitude above the ground. So you just would take, if you lay an angle here, lay the flat part on the ground and the horizontal part and the vertical part up, that how far the sun is above where you're standing is its altitude. And that's an angle. We're not talking distance here. We're talking about an angle. Okay. And, angle from where you're standing. And actually from 90 degrees, because they're going to tell you it's so many degrees off 90, unless you're at the equator, like I've said before, then, or between the tropics. Those are the only places where the sun is ever 90 degrees overhead. Other places, it's less than 90. Whether it's, pointing north or pointing south, it's less than 90. I happened to notice that before I knew any of this, that when the solstice came and I pointed my telescope with its very nice angle markings on it, that when I had it at its highest point, what I thought was almost straight up, the marking was actually a little over 70 degrees. So I'm 20 some degrees off. And of course, they'll tell you this, the reason for 23.54 or 5 angles is because the Earth is tilted. But regardless of what the real reason is, the fact is that at the solstice, the tilt, whatever the tilt is caused by, is maximized at 23.4 or 5. Most people use 5 because if they use 4, then the opposite angle from 90 is 66.6, and that's just too obvious, so they use 0.5 here. And so 23.5 is exactly how far off it was from 90 degrees in the northern hemisphere at my latitude. So then we have the term zenith. Well, hold on, let me go back to altitude here. You can calculate that by taking 90 minus the difference between your latitude and this tilt. The tilt is not always 23.5, it's only at the solstice. So if this tilt is lower, which means the sun is not at the solstice, then the altitude will be lower as well. So tilt refers to the sun path over the Earth's horizon, like I said, and I'll show you that in another illustration. That's all about altitude. Zenith is the highest altitude along the sun's path in the given day. So this center section on the ecliptic up here is the zenith. The azimuth, or bearing, is the sun's clockwise angle from true north, which is to say, more like the sundial here. If this is flat, which in my example it's not, but if you lay this flat, then the sun's angle, it's actually going to start from true north and go around 360. That's how they determine azimuth or bearing. So north is 0 or 360. Some people do that way. If you go a little bit east, that's so many degrees east. So due east is 90 degrees east, okay? Due east is 90 degrees east. Due west is, you go around 3/4, you go around this way, clockwise from, if you're looking down at the ground and you're standing at the north looking at this thing, you're going to go around this way. So you have 270. By the time you get 3/4 of the way around a circle, that's 270 degrees. And so they will say that the sun sets at 270 at the, at the equator, at the equinox, at any given point on the Earth. Whenever the sun is rising due east, it's 90. And when it's setting due west, it's 270. So that's the azimuth or bearing. Okay. Now, I'm going to go on to, let me show you this ecliptic. This is what I mean by the tilt or angle. Here's this 23.5, 23.5 from, this is the equator path on the ball model. I'm just saying, but this doesn't even have to be the ball model. They're just, drawing the whole thing to show you what the path is, but sit on the ground on a flat plane even. The sun will rise here, go south in the north. This is the northern hemisphere because the North Celestial Pole. It'll rise somewhere in the east, northeast, southeast, whatever. It'll tilt toward the equator. There's that 73.5 degrees that I measured with my scope, and then it'll set back north of east or whatever. At the equinox, it'll be directly east-west. Here's the east-west line. It'll rise here, go tilt this way. It'll be at 50 degrees from the ground, and then back to the west. And then, of course, in the winter, it doesn't get very high at all off the ground. That's why we get shorter days and less heat. And so this is what it appears from this person standing here. This is what they see. This is what I've observed, what anybody would observe in the northern hemisphere. And these are the extremities. So the sun is going to keep moving back between these two. And and there's the zenith. They're using the term from a solar, or not solar, but a stellar perspective, a cosmological perspective. But zenith is also used to mean the highest point you're going to see it. So the zenith at the solstice would be here, equinox would be here, and winter solstice would be here in the northern hemisphere. And of course, you would mirror image that for the southern. And as I've shown this before, this is the southern hemisphere looking north. It's tilting towards the north. The northern hemisphere tilts toward the south. They both tilt toward the equator, which goes up and down, straight up and down, but it wavers between these two tropics. And so that's what these were showing, is just, this other illustration I just had on was just showing it from if you had it going all the way around like this. And that's their explanation for that. But this is what we actually observed. And I've gone over this drawing before. Now I want to show, I have a lot of interesting stuff here, but first I want to show, if I can find it, my time lapse that I did yesterday. I needed a day where it was promising to be sunny all day, and also that there were spots on the sun, because you need the spots to tell how the sun's moving. So these are my images that I took yesterday, and you can see how it's moving clockwise. And this is undeniable, but you could also see that it spins faster some parts of the day than others. It looks like it spins faster toward the middle of the day, because this started in the morning. Down here is the morning. I went from solar by the sundial, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So there's 10 images here, 1 per hour, and it seems to move faster when it gets to the middle. See it jump, and then it slowed down. But not only did it slow down up here, and there's dots over here too. It's convenient that there's a set of dots over here, very faint, but they rotate at the same rate. And when it gets up here, watch the last 2 frames. I should have slowed this down, but watch the last 2 frames, because it will slow down and move in just a little bit this way, okay? And by the same token, this one, you can't tell, it's so small, but it's going to move, if anything, slightly out, because the whole sun seems to be turning like this only at the end of the day, a little bit. So we can see that the sun absolutely moves in a clockwise fashion over our sky. And like I said, I've caught grief for keeping my camera horizontal from my position all day. But I think a friend of mine is going to be, if he gets good weather conditions, track the sun at an angle, so that keeping at the same angle of the sun. The thing is that I haven't done yet, because I want to think of a way to do this accurately, is to have a ball with markings on it going across my field of view, and I tilt the camera to follow that path, and we'll see whether the spots move clockwise or counterclockwise, because it seems to me, just thinking of it in my head, whether horizontal or tracking, if I track it, it shouldn't move at all. With the horizontal camera, watching something move across the sky in an arc with a mark on it, that mark, to my imagination, should move counterclockwise from my perspective. If I'm watching something go in an arc over my head from left to right, I'm thinking the marks will appear to go counterclockwise, but I haven't done that by experiment. I may be mistaken, but it seems to me that the clockwise motion is something very important to consider. Also, the lateral motion at the end of the day there. And I especially want to be able to do this at the equinox, because supposedly, by standard theory, the sun is its north pole is a little more tilted toward us, And we shouldn't see as much of the clockwise motion. We should see more of the lateral motion throughout the sun, throughout the day. So I'm going to see if that holds true or not. I'm not likely to get much photography of the sky during the winter for obvious reasons. And then I don't want to even, you know, if I bundled up, I'd have to keep my camera warm and dry too. And I don't think I'm going to be doing that. It's just, you know, somebody also have to take that in the southern hemisphere would be nice, or someplace warmer where we don't have bad winter seasons. And that it's really also going to be hard to do when there isn't very many hours of daylight, because you need a lot of time to track the sun. So the point being that for right now, I'm trying to verify or debunk standard models about how the sun moves across the sky and whether it's an illusion or anything like that. So at any rate, that's yesterday's sun movement and convenient spots and sunny skies most of the day. We had a little bit of clouds. You can see sometimes there was this glow or this, you know, distortion down here. So anyway, I think that it's interesting that the sun moved faster in the middle of the day when, as I showed on here, its lateral movement slowed down, which is kind of interesting. Those are two factors we needed to know about when we're studying the sun. Now, I have some other images here that I want to roll through. This one, I'll just go, since I'm near the end, I'll go back to the first image I had. This is a cable and wireless Great Circle map, which is interesting. And you can see there, you can, you know, go and find these things that are readily available in you know, any image, Google Images or whatnot. But this is an old one. I don't know how old. It's not terribly old by the looks of it, but probably based on an older maps, but not too old. It's just because since cable and wireless. So, but it's interesting that they would make this Great Circle map and have these lines marked, curved the way they do. Of course, they'll say it's because it's really a sphere, but who knows? Anyway, cable and wireless map. And of course, this was one I did a video on the other day where I compared the actual eclipse edited images to a ceiling light in my room and making an eclipse of my own. And I've done some other ones since then that kind of put a little monkey wrench in it as far as whether there's anything here or not. But nothing serious. Anyway, here is also another map you can find. Let me blow this one up a bit, where it shows the tropics. And this shape, is, in my opinion, is more due to lensing effects than the actual shape of the Earth. Because, as I said, you need a double concave lens over every part of the, you know, mainly over the center and covering from north to south, as I showed the other day. And this is the limits of the 90-degree sun overhead at your location. That's all that the tropics mean. Here's another one, of course, is the standard AE map, tropic markings. And this one is from Enoch. Somebody made a map that they think represents what Enoch was describing as far as solar line time. So that's another, and it shows that the Earth's orbit, lunar orbit, I'm not sure what they mean by Earth's orbit because Enoch doesn't describe it as moving. And it shows where the constellations are as well at the solstices and equinoxes. And the new year started in March. And I've always said it makes perfect sense for the year to start in March when the Earth is waking up from winter. That's the best time to start a new year, just as either sunrise or sunset is the best time to start a new day. And that's the way it was in biblical times. And even the month names in the Western world, December is based on the word deca, which means 10. So the 10th month, just as October, we all know the word octal for 8. That was the 8th month. September the 7th. So it used to be that way. I mean, when you think of December is 10th, that means January is 11, February is 12, and you start over with 1 in March. So it used to be that way, and it's proved by our month names, and they can't hide that. So there you go. This was one I did the other day. Sorry, it doesn't have a background, as it's the SVG image, which is Inkscape. I showed about shadows and light and penumbras and all that. Let me go up here to they have Enoch's priestly calendar, the Zadok priesthood, which is an interesting name. I'd have to read Enoch again to remind myself about that. I've only read it once, but the Zadok priesthood is in Ezekiel after chapter 39 forward, and this is in my prophecy book on my books.feather.net. So it's a different priesthood. It has nothing to do with the priesthood of Levi or the laws of Moses. It's a different priesthood that will happen, in my opinion, during the millennium, which is after the tribulation. At any rate, I have a picture of the moon. That's just a small one that I don't think I even took that one. I just had that on my records. This was, as I showed the other day, the lack of anything on this side of the moon when I did, image processing on it. But that doesn't mean that nothing's there, because I can duplicate this effect, and I did that in a video the other day. I think I showed it on Sun and Moon Group, where I did this with a rubber ball and did the same processing on it, and it still looks like there's nothing there. So I don't know what to conclude from that. Just moving on a bit, this is somebody did a picture of how big the Earth should look from the moon, given the relative sizes. We're told that there's the moon is supposedly about 1/4 or so the size of the Earth. People get mixed up between 1/4 and 1/6. 1/6 is the gravitational force, supposedly. 1/4 is the size. So the Earth should look 4 times bigger in the size than our moon looks to us in our skies. And that's how the moon should appear in any Apollo images. This is supposedly a illustration of lunar cycles, but here's the problem that nobody's been able to answer really, is because, for example, when you have a full moon, supposedly the sun's over here, this half of the Earth is lit up, and also this half of the moon. Well, what's wrong with this picture? Obviously, if the moon is behind the Earth in its shadow, it should be eclipsed, fully eclipsed, every month at a full moon. But it isn't. How is that possible? Well, the sun must be at a vertical, so to speak, angle, like up here, shining on the moon. Well, if it's up here enough to clear the Earth, then the moon should not be completely full ever. It should be should have a little bit of an edge on it. But we all know that the full moon looks like a flat disk. It's fully lit. There's no drop off at any edge of the moon's disk. And so, how can the full moon be possible? I don't see how. And the same with the new moon is another thing. We can't see it. Well, there should be at least an edge you can see. And as somebody pointed out the other day, there should be earth shine. Look, the Earth is got oceans, most of it, and very reflective. It's got an atmosphere that should shine the light right back off of it. And where is Earth shine on the new moon? You don't see it on the new moon, only on an eclipse. So these are all questions that are not answered by standard cosmology. This is also a way of illustrating how many moons should fit, what it means to have, given pictures that I found of supposed to scale sizes, relative sizes. I just copied this moon 4 times. It's, not quite a fourth. It's a little bit bigger. So that's why it sticks out a bit. But this is how many moons should fit on the Earth's surface. It's 27% instead of 25%. And the distance is 30 Earths. And this is why, as I said the other day, that in other Hangouts, that you can simulate the sunlight and the moon and the Earth, because all you have to do is get a ball this size and get 30 lengths of that, 30 diameters, and then have your moon. And the light, since it appears for all practical purposes to be the same size and distance as that's the moon, then all you need is a light that's this diameter shining over here, and you can simulate the sun, moon, and the Earth as far as shadows go and movements and terminator lines. So there's no reason you can't do that simulation. You just need 30 Earths between the Earth and the moon, and then have a light just even so ever slightly shortly behind here, which is, I think, is the case. So that's just something to consider. And let's see what this image is. This is supposedly how they're determining, but you can, I mean, this works observation, whether the explanation for it is ridiculous, but the observation is if here's a person standing in the middle of the circle, around them are the 4 directions, they got north to their back, they're facing the first quarter moon when the sun is setting, okay? And then here's how you could tell, they're explaining why it's the first quarter, but at any rate, this same person can see the full moon when the sun is setting and the moon's rising. When they do this at the same time, that's when the moon is full. But like I said, if the sun's able to fully light the moon, then we, from slightly below this, which we have to be in order for the moon to be lit up, should see a little bit of a shadow up here, because the sun will be, the moon has to be elevated enough for the sun to hit it fully, and therefore this terminator line should be at a slight angle. So that's what doesn't make sense about that. But as far as directions go, you're going to see the last quarter, this person's still standing here, and this, this is just a cutout of it. Standing here, you should see the last quarter in the west when the sun is over here. So at any rate, that's just a handy chart for which phase of the moon you should see at which time. These, of course, are maps that somebody made of wind movements and so forth. Here's the standard explanation of phases. Like I said, that doesn't make any sense. Here's another one. Oh, I skipped this one. This is equinoxes, supposedly the full face of the Earth, even though it's supposedly spinning at this angle along this stick axis, pole through the middle, pointing toward Polaris. At either side, that the sun is evenly lighting the whole disk, whereas north is pointing here in the summer and the south is pointing here in the winter. But I've been over that stuff before. Here is how the Earth is supposedly heated. This was another thing that somebody made, but this thing is pointing the wrong way. This end should be down, that end should be up. As far as if you follow this as the arc of the sun, it should be going up like that. At any rate, I'm just showing different pictures I found. There's that one that we've all seen. Here's one where somebody has inverted the flat circular map and put the Antarctic in the middle. As far as pole goes, electrical or magnetic poles, it doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with the physical location of any land masses. But this is their theory that the Arctic is actually around the outside edge. These, of course, are the famous NASA can't make up its mind as to the size of continents on the ball. And there's some other ridiculous stuff. And this, I think, is somebody's, square and circle map, because according to the Bible, the Earth has 4 corners. And I don't know if I have that drawing of mine in here, but I'll find it if I don't. Here's another way that people are trying to explain directions in the standard cosmological model, which can be helpful if we're trying to explain stuff to people. Here's a handy sky chart, constellation chart. This works. You hold it up at the night sky and it'll show you where everything is. And incidentally, the end of the handle of the Little Dipper is Polaris. And it's pointed to, it's easier to find the Big Dipper. The end of the handles, or the dipper part of it, points to this. So if you find the Big Dipper, I think if I need to blow that up some more, but the Big Dipper points to Polaris, and it's the end of the handle of the Little Dipper. So Big Dipper is over here someplace. I think this is it. But if you follow, actually, it's supposed to be the end too. So I'm not sure I got that right. But like I said, oh, here it is. It's over here. I had my orientation wrong. See, this is the Big Dipper right here, part of Ursa Major. You follow the handle and you go down to these N2 stars. They point at Polaris always. They always point at Polaris. And like I say, you can verify that that's Polaris by following this around and finding the Little Dipper. So that's an easy way to line up Polaris, which is true north. So there's that. And let me see what other images I got here. I'm almost done. This is the, the curvature thing. And these are back to Enoch's portals. Somebody tried to draw out what Enoch was trying to describe as far as the portals of the sun and moon and things like that. So anyway, let me stop sharing that one and get my other set of images, a real short one, more about navigation, because I know there are people who want to go to the North or South Pole. It's not as easy as it looks, especially for any of us who have never tried to navigate a plane or a boat. Those are, there's a lot of complication going on. I got some of these from, I got these from the internet, obviously. And here we have an airplane. Because it's not like just walking along the ground and following a compass or surface features, because you're in a fluid environment and what's going on in the ground is not always visible. So you need a way to navigate. And I gathered these things after reading the book written in the, I think the 40s, right around or after World War II by one of my relatives, called Practical Air Navigation by William Thoburn, and he worked for the government. He worked with the military, and he was a standard ball earther, of course, and he believed in evolution, but also a Bible teacher, so go figure. Anyway, he was very meticulous and wrote the book for the military and the civil aviation to use in those days for teaching people, pilots or ship captains or navigators, how to do their work and how to use various kinds of equipment. And they give some terminology here. It's like, this is north and the plane is heading this way. This is magnetic north. This is true north. Remember, I showed that on the sundial. This is Polaris. This is magnetic north. There's a difference between the two, and I'm going to show the map for that. So the magnetic heading is where the plane is going. The magnetic heading is this arc, but there's a different term that I'll show in a bit that has this arc, or there's all sorts of arcs going on, because the plane sometimes, and we all know it's true even on boats as well, the direction the plane is pointing is not necessarily the direction the plane is moving. It could be pushed by the wind and going this way. I've been in a plane, it freaked me out the first time I saw that. I happened to be in a small plane and looked out the front window, and the plane was going forward, but the plane's nose was pointing off to the side just like this. It was freaky. So the plane was going north, true north, but it was aimed this way. And then this other, let's see, which image? Okay, there we go. That showed the magnetic heading. This is the angle to north, and it can get really complicated. You can look this stuff up. They show with a boat and things like this is this drawing, where they add things little by little because it gets really layers and layers of navigational thing. This information, this is true north, and this is the heading. That's where the boat is going. And here's magnetic north, magnetic variation from true north. Or we have the deviation from magnetic north is where your compass is reading compass north, because it's different. I'll show you that on the next thing. And the compass heading is where you're going. And you'll see, if you go to timeanddate.com, you'll see heading, bearing, terms like that. That's why I'm explaining this stuff, or just familiarizing with you if you didn't know. And then you have a crosswind that's pushing you in this direction, and then there's a tide pushing you. So navigation is a really complicated thing. So if anybody's planning by boat or plane or whatever it is to go to any of the poles, where you have to know that your compass isn't necessarily going to be of a lot of use after a certain point, and that, as I said, magnetically, in any magnetic field, the lines converge at the poles, and so on the surface of the Earth, your compass may want to go vertical at that point, in which case you don't know which way is anyway. And so if you're going to navigate by the stars or anything else, if you know about where you are or whatever, you got your work cut out for you before you even think about going. Here is a magnetic declination for the US 2004 is one I found. Let me blow that up a bit. And so, for example, if you live here, let's see if they give one example down here. At any rate, they're showing you degrees from true north. Like this one happens to be at that year, that spot. This 90 degrees west is is true with true north. Well, here we have, if you go this way, it's -5. So if you live over here, you have a 5-degree offset from true north. So when I set up my sundials, I can't point them true north because I'm over that way to the east. So true north is going to be, actually in my location, it's 6 degrees off. So I have to, if I use a magnetic compass and make sure there's nothing metal around to mess with it, or any strong magnetic fields, and of course it's hard to avoid in suburbia. You got wires everywhere, but you have to understand how far off from magnetic north a given location is in a given year, because it keeps changing. The magnetic pole moves, and of course you go the opposite way from your compass reading. When you go this way, your compass is going to have you a little bit off, and it curves quite drastically over here, which is more than this curve. So go figure that. How can there be that much of a difference if the US is plastered on a ball? Why is it so different over here? That doesn't make any sense. It makes more sense from purely, I mean, I know they're showing the magnetic lines, but why? Why would it be that different at that point? And that they don't say. At any rate, those are a whole bunch of things to consider about if you're going to go somewhere and not use so much modern technology, but a simple compass. It's not so simple. Navigation is complicated, and don't know how else to explain that, but there you go. But mainly I wanted to show how, as I started out with reading from Genesis, that the purpose of the lights in the dome or sky, and they're all in it, is to show us not only day and light and seasons as far as the time goes, or the day of the year, but also signs to tell us God's messages in some way. And this kind of ties into the recent hype, if you want to call that, but interest in the astronomical alignments of September 23rd. So we're just under a month away from that, and which happens to be just after the equinox, where we have this constellation Virgo with the 12 stars and the sun above her head and the moon at her feet, and she's about to give birth to the man-child Jupiter. And in the infrared spectrum, there's also a red dragon approaching to devour the child. And so there are good videos that I put on my my new blog. Let me go get, because I set up a blog because I finally, for the second and final time, quit Facebook, and I'm posting things here. And if you go down a bit, I've been posting a lot of prophetic stuff that I find interesting, and I am loath to support any kind of date setting, but at the same time, I don't want to be sticking my head in the sand and in denial of the fact that God said in Genesis that he put those things in the sky for more than just giving light and more than just telling the time of year. He's telling us other things as well, the prophetic season, and this sign matches very well Revelation 12. That doesn't mean we're in the middle of the tribulation. If you watch those videos, especially there's one, I forget which one it's called. Let me try and get that specific video, because it does a good job of explaining overlapping layers in Revelation. And it's this one, it'd be, well, let me go ahead and get the YouTube link for you, so you don't have to go to my blog first. So I have to start playing the video and then go to YouTube, and then I will hit share if the page will load. There we go, and grab the link, and I will post that in the chat. So this link is to a video. It's about a 1-hour lecture on somebody whose personal habits are somewhat annoying to me. He's got a very high voice, and he's very animated and yelling a lot. But try to look past that. The information is good, and especially when he gets to a very good drawing, an image he has of Revelation. And let me see if I can find that real quick, because I'll share it, because I thought it was so good I copied it just to have for my own use. And let me see if I can find that real quick. I just rearranged recently all my disk drives because things were getting harder to find. And let me see if I can find that exact image. I think this is it. Come on, wake up image. Let me share that. Okay, yeah, that's it. Let me screen share and get the right window. That's always helpful. Present. Okay, I think you can see this. Let me blow it up a bit. This is what that guy in that link I just gave is showing for Revelation. This is the Revelation 12 sign right in the middle. And he's showing, and he'll explain in his lecture, how this goes way back to the beginning of the 7-year tribulation. And these numbers are chapter numbers in Revelation. And they extend to the end as well. And the same thing for other signs in Revelation. The Daniel 70th week is also matching up with Revelation, as I've gone into in my prophecy stuff. And this is chapter 12 of Revelation, extending forward and back. This is chapter 11. This is chapter 13, the reign of the Antichrist or beast. And this is chapter 14. And he's showing, and everybody agrees who studied Revelation, that there are what they call parentheses or flashbacks, as I use the term in my websites, that are out of the chronology of the sevens. The sevens being 7 seals, then 7 trumpets, then 7 bowls. That's how Revelation is laid out. And that this is something we have to understand, that not everything in Revelation is chronological, just like the 7 letters to the 7 churches in the first, the second and third chapters. That signifies the church age. There's 7 churches, were not all the churches. They weren't even the most prominent. But there's more of a message there than just what was going on in the specific churches. And by the way, one of the churches, the 6th one, I believe Philadelphia, is told that they will be kept out of the hour of trial to come upon the whole inhabited world to test the inhabitants of the earth, or earth dwellers, or earthlings, you could use that term. That's what tribulation is for, and that the church is promised to be kept out of that. And so this is a really good chart. And also this one I just came across. Let me blow that up. And this is another way, if you look at my commentary on Revelation, I don't do this. I do more of a chapter by chapter. But somebody noticed that this form is called a chiastic form because the Greek letter chi is an X, basically, to us. And here's like half the X, okay? And what that means is where you see the mirror image, things lead up to the central point, and then they go back. The mirror image is a central point, and it's the point of Revelation is that Satan is cast out in chapter 12. There's chapter 12 again. That is the central point of an argument or presentation. It doesn't mean necessarily a chronology, but like I said in that previous image that I showed, this one, that it seems to be the centerpiece of the whole thing. And incidentally, that is the middle chapter of Revelation. There are 22 chapters. It's about the middle, and given there's a range of things in the middle. But going back to this one, we see these parallels. You look for a prologue. We have an epilogue down here in my little, I had paused the video at that point, got in the way in the red line. Prologue and epilogue. And then we have 7 epistles, 7 angels. We have 7 seals, 7 bowls. We have 144,000 people sealed and the 7th trumpets, and we have 144,000, that same people again, not seen again until this chapter, and the 7 angels. Then we have 2 witnesses, 2 beasts. I never made that connection before. The woman clothed with the sun, and the woman, she keeps the commandments of God. Then we have, that was chapter 12. Then we have the dragon. We have the woman fleeing, and then the center point, Satan cast out. So this is all about the defeat of Satan finally, after all these years of human history. And that's what Revelation is about. Now, you can see my older chart that I've had that I put in my commentary book and everything. I'm not going to change any of that stuff now. This was one way I was trying to make sense of also Old Testament prophecies from Ezekiel 38-39, where there's a 7-year period where they burn the weapons of Gog and Magog. And that this is the reason I had it end here, the midpoint of the tribulation, when the Antichrist breaks the treaty and declares himself God. That is absolutely the midpoint of Daniel's 70th week. There's no doubt about that. That's also the seventh trumpet. And my reasoning here was that people aren't going to be in Judea to burn these weapons after this point. They will flee at this point. They're supposed to, at least the faithful ones flee. And there's a lot of other details in here that seem to indicate that this has to end. This 7 years has to end at the midpoint. So I'm not sure. This is probably wrong, but that's the best I could do with that Old Testament prophecy and several other things involved there, not just Ezekiel. But this is where I had the seals. I have the rapture first for various reasons I've gone over before, but this could be a gap between the rapture and the tribulation, because it seems that the sealing of the 444,000 has to predate that, and the two witnesses are killed at the seventh trumpet. So, but they had to have started their ministry 3.5 years before, which is why we had that. Back to here for a second real quick. The two witnesses go way back here. This is the chapter 11. The two witnesses, we only see them in chapter 11, but they had to have been busy for 3.5 years before that, so they start here. So going back to this chart, that's why that's the equivalent of what I got here. And this is when the 7 years start, because halfway through it's broken by the beast. And this is the sequence of things that are going to happen. The whole sequence is we're going to see some kind of conquest without weapons, but this is, to me, indicating some kind of political intrigue. The white horse is absolutely not Jesus, because Jesus is the lamb opening the seals. And for various other reasons, just because it's a white horse, Satan is always mimicking God, trying to be God. And so it's come as no surprise, as the Bible says, that he masquerades as an angel of light. So the white horse here being summoned by the lamb is not the lamb. This is the Antichrist, the fake Christ. And then after this political conquest comes war, outright war. And then after the aftermath of war is scarcity, the black horse. Then the green horse is a quarter of the world's population dies. And these are the aftermaths of war. And by scarcity, I mean economic collapse. So we have a conquest, like a coup or something, political upheaval of some kind, rearrangement of nations or something going on that prepares for the events to come. It's followed by a hot war, which leads to economic collapse and scarcity, and then a lot of death. After that, we see souls, martyrs at the base of the altar. It says under, but it could mean the base of, because like if you poured out, if there's a sacrifice on the altar, the blood runs down to the base, and that is the blood of the martyrs that have been spilled. That's the whole thing that sacrifices have symbolized all these centuries and millennia, as that people, the innocent, have been killed. And that's what all that symbolizes. And so here we see martyrs at the base of the altar, like a poured out offering, asking for vengeance on the people who killed them. And God does not rebuke them for this. These are people in heaven, martyrs, who are asking God to avenge their blood. And God just tells them to be patient, because their number hasn't been completed yet at that point. Then things start to really happen on earth that have no parallel. Like, you could pass for things in history for these things that have led up to that. There have been martyrs, there's been war, there's been famine, there's been death, but not to that scale, of course. But by the sixth seal, things happen on earth that have never happened before. And this is where in Revelation we hear the people all over the earth, young and old, small and great, calling on the rocks to fall on them, hiding in holes and caves in the ground, and saying, hide us from the face of the one on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. So that's why I've always said the very latest the wrath of the Lamb can happen is at the sixth seal. Because God is not, Jesus, the Lamb, is not going to punish his own bride, his own body. They are already with him in heaven by that point at the latest. And as I said, if the Lamb is opening the seals and dishing out judgments, and this is all his wrath because he's causing it, then we cannot be here for that wrath. That's why I put the rapture before the seals, even though that may not be the beginning of the tribulation precisely at that point. They may coincide, I don't know. Then after that happens and people got this major wake-up call, then the 144,000 Jews, ethnic Jews, are sealed. 12,000 from each of 12 tribes. That's where we get 144,000. It doesn't mean anyone else. The Bible never attributes this to the church. And then there's a half hour of silence that is not true after or between the trumpets and bowls. So there's something special that sets the seals apart. And I believe these happen in fairly short order after the rapture, before the tribulation actually starts. And that is when the two witnesses appear. After people are hiding and they realize that the wrath of God has come, then the two witnesses arise. So the church does not need to be here, can't be here, because God sends different witnesses for that period of time. Then things really start to heat up. This is the first half of the Antichrist rule. Actually, not overtly so much. It's the kingdom that's set up, but the Antichrist is not possessed by Satan until this midpoint. But a third of the earth is burned. A third of the sea is poisoned. Wormwood comes after that to poison the rivers, a third of them. The light from, I said space at that time, forgive me for, this was during my BC times, or BFE times. Light from the sky is reduced by a third. That hasn't happened yet. No one, hey, I have to allegorize completely to make it mean something else. Then we have the three woes. Locust from the abyss. This is when the key to the abyss is given to, let me blow that up a little bit more. The key to the abyss is given to Satan. There, I believe CERN and other things are the devil's attempt to open the abyss early. They will all fail. God himself has to give the key. And when he does, locusts come out of it. And these locusts are described in Revelation. And they torment people for 5 months, and people will want to die, but they will not be allowed to die. Death will flee from them, it says. And then that's followed by 4 angels who speak of things to come, and a third of the world's population dies, not a fourth, as it was up here at the 4th seal. At the 6th trumpet, a third of the earth's population dies, and that's when the two witnesses are killed. And then after 3.5 days, they rise again and are taken to heaven. And then after that, we are told about the woman, and then the beast, and the 144,000 are seen again on Zion. This was, going back to that other chart again. Let me go back there real quick. This is about the This is the woman of chapter 12 with the stars and the sun and the moon. This is chapter 11 is the two witnesses. Chapter 13 is the rise of the Antichrist, kills the two witnesses at that point. So let me go back here. This is what's happening. And then the earth is harvested, the grapes of wrath. That's where that phrase comes from. And it's at that point, after killing the two witnesses, that the beast or Antichrist breaks the 7-year treaty or whatever it is and declares himself God, desecrates the temple, so there has to be a temple, and declares himself God. This is what Daniel talked about. And so this is when the Great Tribulation begins, the second half of those 3.5 years, and Jesus talked of these days being shortened. So there's a disagreement, or impossible to say whether the days being shortened means the number of years are actually changed, or that the length of a day changes such that we get day and night cycles much faster than they used to be. So this may not be 7 years as we know it. And it's a good thing, because it's difficult to understand how life could go on for very long, but it has to go some length of time for all the events that have to happen. First of all, terrible ulcers break out on the people who have the mark of the beast, because I forgot to mention that when this beast declares himself God, the second beast, the false prophet, is the one who says everyone must take the mark of the beast. And I've explained in my documents that the mark of the beast is not our personal ID. It is an etching into the skin. That's what the Greek indicates, something etched into the skin, more like a tattoo than a chip, but it could be a chip, I don't know, or something like that. But at any rate, it's not our personal ID. It is the beast's name or number. Not our name or number, the beast's name or number. It is a pledge of loyalty, and in my opinion, will be sold as an upgrade, a transhumanist offer that you can only survive if you upgrade and take this mark. But what God does right after that is to put everybody who has taken the mark get these terrible ulcers on their skin. And they make people just absolutely, unbelievably miserable. And I believe it will happen at the spot where they took the mark, which people have the option of their right hand or their forehead. And that's where I think the ulcers will break out. So if this happens in the future when I'm not around, then you'll know that at least I was right about something. So at any rate, more important that the Bible's right is the thing. At any rate, I believe that these ulcers will break out on the people's skin where they took these marks, because this transhumanist upgrade, which the mark will be not just the name or number of the beast, it will also have some kind of DNA additive in it. And it will be rejected by the body, and people will break out in these terrible ulcers. After that happens, after all this other stuff has happened, things are just ramping up. And the sea turns to blood, and everything in the sea dies. Whether that means all the oceans of the earth, or whether the Mediterranean, which is typically called the sea. There are other seas mentioned in the Bible, but this is a worldwide judgment. So it seems to me it's probably all the ocean life. All the rivers turn to blood. Then the sun scorches people, and these are, the bowl judgments. Each bowl is a different thing. Then the sun scorches people. After all this stuff, the sun scorches people, and then it goes completely dark over the kingdom of the beast, which I happen to believe is the Western world. The sun goes completely dark, and people whatever it is about this darkness, people, it says, are gnawing their tongues in agony at this point. Then the Euphrates River dries up, and a horde of demons comes across from the east to attack Israel. So this is where I've mentioned before about by process of elimination, why I decided that the Western world is the kingdom of the beast, because we have the kingdom of the north being Gog, and Magog is the land. And then we have these kings of the east with demons coming out of them that resembled frogs, they said, from the beast and the false prophet and the dragon. And they bring this 600 million soldier army, whether it's mechanized or human or demonic, it's not specified, but they are described in detail. And this happens when the Euphrates River dries up. So be prepared for that if you happen to be stuck here. I hope you're not. I hope you'll consider the gospel and get out of that, because this isn't about humans and their little shields and bows and arrows defeating the Antichrist. This is way beyond that. So we have this demonic horde coming from the east, and we have Gog from the north, and we have the kings of the south and the Antichrist in the west. And then the last thing is Armageddon. Now, this is not going to be some epic battle. There are more other epic battles, bloodbaths. At one point, Revelation describes a battle outside of Jerusalem in the valley, not the valley of Megiddo, because that's Armageddon, but outside of Jerusalem, where the blood rises to the level of a horse's bridle. That is a bloodbath, literally. And yet Armageddon is not it. Armageddon happens way at the end of the tribulation, the very last plague, and nothing happens that we do, because that's the point when Jesus comes down and defeats the Antichrist himself with the armies of heaven, and he has a sword that proceeds out of his mouth and defeats the armies of Antichrist without anybody firing a shot. Now, there's another battle, the Battle of Gog and Magog, earlier, that I think happens here at the White Horse, or possibly here, I don't know. But that battle is where people of Israel finally wake up from their stupor and realize who the real God is and who the real Messiah is, and they finally turn back to God, because right now they haven't. And that's why people call them illegitimate. In a sense, they are. They're in unbelief, and that's why they had to be judged and go through all this. Israel will be ransacked and ruined. It's a terrible description in the Old Testament of what happens then. And at that point, though, when Gog attacks in Ezekiel 38:39, God himself will intervene. These people, these armies will be amassed on the mountains of Israel, ready to wipe it out. And they will be motivated by wanting to plunder a land that is recovering from war. I believe that's Psalm 83, which has happened before that. Very likely at about the same time, the forces of the north will say, ooh, look at this defenseless land that has just enlarged its borders. They feel safe at last because their immediate neighbors have been wiped out. Israel has more land and lots of goodies, lots of resources. And we know Russia, for example, wants that. And they have been in the Middle East, make no mistake about it. So they're waiting for their part to play. And Their motivation is totally different from the ones in Psalm 83. They have come to take a plunder, to attack a nation that has recovered from war and has laid down its guard, so to speak, by having no walls or bars or gates around their city. It's described in that way. That's their motivation. But when they get to the mountains of Israel, God wipes them out. He sends a plague on them. Is very, how he sends the plague is not specified. It could be he's telling other armies to do this, but the description is interesting because it says the soldiers' eyes will be consumed from their sockets while they stand on their feet, and their tongues will be consumed out of their mouths before they hit the ground. This sounds something like a neutron bomb. I'm not sure, but at any rate, it's instigated by God, and these people will turn on each other and wipe themselves out as well, and Israel won't have to fire a shot. But this sets into motion a chain of other events. At any rate, by the end, at the Battle of Armageddon, it's Jesus' battle, not ours, and he wipes them all out in one swipe of his sword, and Satan is bound. This is where the millennium begins, because Satan is bound for 1,000 years. He's put into the abyss in a great heavy chain, which is, if it's Tartarus, it's the place described as a place of gloomy darkness, and he is chained there for 1,000 years so he can't deceive the nation. So the 1,000 years are described by the later chapters in Ezekiel. We mentioned Ezekiel 38, 39, while 40 and forward is describing the millennial kingdom, the messianic kingdom of 1,000 years. And this is a time, Revelation says, when the martyrs who were killed specifically by beheading for not taking the mark of the beast will rule with him on earth for 1,000 years. Those is a specific subset of all the righteous, not all of us, not the church. These people were resurrected for not taking a mark. Well, when was the mark given? Right here, at the second half. At the end of the trumpet judgments, before the bowl judgments start, this red arrow is when the mark is given. So only people who died by beheading and the second half are resurrected for the millennium to reign on earth with Jesus. So this is a very specific time. And when Jesus comes at Armageddon, when he first gets there, this is when Jesus was describing in the Gospels in Matthew 24, I think of Matthew 25, maybe right after that, where he says about the sheep and goat judgments, where he says, when the Son of Man comes in his kingdom and sets up his throne, and he judges the sheep and goats. And I've been over this before briefly, that the sheep and goats, there's three groups of people, sheep, goats, and the least of these. And I believe, for a variety of reasons I got over before, that the least of these are the Jews during the second half of the tribulation. And they are going to be, the sheep and goats are the Gentiles who will be judged according to how they treated the Jews. I know people routinely apply the sheep and goat judgments to Christians, but I don't believe that's the case. These are righteous people who follow Jesus, or unrighteous, as the case may be, whether they're sheep or goats, but they're being judged on the basis of how they treated God's people during that time, which is the Jews. The sheep did certain things. They visited people in prison. They fed people who were hungry, gave water to people who were thirsty. And Jesus says to the sheep, the good people, says, and they're, enter the kingdom of my Father prepared for you. And because you did all these things for me. And they're like, when did we do that for you? And he said, well, you did it for the least of me, these, my brothers and sisters. And then he turns to the goats and said, you didn't do these things for me. And they said, well, wait a minute. We did a lot of good deeds in your name. We did them in your name. And we did all these things for you. And he says, I never knew you. You didn't do these things because you didn't do them for the least of these. In other words, they were withholding help for the Jews during the tribulation. Because Jesus tells us when he's doing this judgment. This is not the final judgment. There are other things described in Revelation that tell us about the final judgment. And then after that 1,000 years, there's a final rebellion because, and I mentioned here at this green arrow, that's the second coming. And this is the 1,000 years. And at the end of the 1,000 years, then Jesus releases Satan for one brief moment where he goes out and deceives the nations again. And by the way, the great delusion, the strong delusion, is from God to unbelievers. It's not from Satan to believers. The strong delusion, if you look it up in the New Testament, is sent by God to those who hated the truth. That's who will be deceived. And it will be a deception from God to those people. He's going to say, basically, you hated the truth before. I'm going to make you swallow a great big lie. So that's that is. And then back to what I was saying about the end of the millennium, Satan is released for a short time to prove once again that people have had 1,000 years of peace, prosperity, no war, no sickness, very little death. Only it says in the Old Testament, it says that during this time, anyone who dies at 100 will be thought a mere youth. So we're going back to almost Edenic conditions. People will die, though, as it's, post-Edenic, but still the time when people lived, 500 years or more. That's how it will be during the millennium. And who are these mortals who are reproducing and refilling the earth and dying? They're mortal. They're dying. They're not us. Because even by the pre-wrath or any, different scenario of when the rapture happens, everybody believes that the church is certainly completed by the end of the tribulation. And so there are mortals on the earth who have not been raptured and given their new immortal bodies at this point. These are the sheep of the sheep and goat judgments. They are mortals who survived the tribulation and were righteous people. They will repopulate the world for 1,000 years. And these are the people who, at the end of that, they will have had many children, many generations over those 1,000 years. And those people that born to them, their children and descendants, will not have experienced life as we know it. They will not have experienced terrible persecution or untimely death or suffering or war. And after that many years of peace and prosperity and paradise, soon as Satan's let out of his cage, they turn away from God, and proving once again that the problem is not environment, it's not suffering, it's that people just don't like God. They want to rebel against their creator, and you give them half an excuse and they'll take it. And so Satan instigates this. He whips people into a rebellion, and yet here again, no war even takes place, even though they had mass around the holy city, it says, around Jerusalem. These stupid people, just like Israel, after they saw all the miracles of God after they left Egypt, they still turned away from him in a heartbeat. Will be full circle in human history at the end of the millennium, and people will rebel, and immediately, without asking any questions, Jesus just takes the beast and the false prophet. He takes Satan and throws him in a lake of fire. At the end of the tribulation, before the millennium, I forgot to mention that the beast and the false prophet, that is to say the Antichrist and the religious leader, are thrown alive into the lake of fire, where they will be tormented day and night forever, it says. And then again, at the end of the millennium, the Satan himself is thrown into the lake of fire, where they will be tormented day and night forever, and so is anyone whose name is not written in the book of life. So there's where you get the lake of fire stuff. It's toward the end of Revelation, after the end of the millennium. At any rate, this is kind of, I didn't really plan to go into all that, but it kind of flowed from the images I had here. And here's another one that shows the Gog and Magog area that they're coming from. Magog is up here in Russia. It talks about the mountains and the Black Sea and all that stuff. And Turkey is some of these other areas with them, and they're all going to converge in the war of Gog and Magog. Here's Put, Ethiopia. Sheba and Dedan are Saudi Arabia, and they will be the ones who just sit idly by and go, oh, what are you going to do, Gog and Magog? Are you just going to take a plunder? This is Persia and Iran, and this is a map of all the players in that Gog and Magog war. Whereas earlier, Psalm 83 war was this immediate area. The nations you see now, they are named in their ancient names as being this area right around Israel, her immediate neighbors that are surrounding her. And this area of Jordan coming out here was originally part of the Balfour Declaration, but they reneged on their promise and gave Israel less than half of the area. So at any rate, and it's Jordan, and these people have never assimilated the so-called Palestinians. They abandoned their own people to use them as political pawns, but that's a whole nother story. Anyway, this is a map of the prophetic area, the center, the ground zero, if you will, of all those things that's going to happen. And here's some other talks. This is from Chuck Missler on his opinions of matching up the Matthew 24 and Luke 21 about the times of the ends and how they match up to Revelation. Here's another version of that. And the beginning of sorrows is between, because the first generation, there's this overlap. It's a good illustration of it, that Jesus said certain things that were going to happen that happened in 70 AD that have happened in the past, but not everything. And then he overlaps with these other things about what would happen in the last generation. So, and it's this generation that will not pass before all these things take place. That's what Jesus was talking about. People get confused. At any rate, I think I'm going to stop sharing that stuff. And so the beginning of this, I never intended to go this long, but it just kind of flowed. That's the way I like to do things sometimes, just have a few things to start with and then see where it goes. And as if we were here for the beginning, started out with talk mostly about the sun and its movements and terminology and sundials and how they tell us things about how the sun is moving and what we can pay attention to. The angle, the elevation, and the speed of the sun are all factors we need to consider, as well as the movement of the spots throughout a given day and all sorts of things. And we need to do this at different times of the year. I've only been watching it since the June solstice, and I want to pay particular attention when we get nearer the equinox, which is only a few weeks away. And by the way, all the other things happening in recent weeks is going to be the Miss America pageant. Normally I wouldn't care, but my niece is going to be in it. She is Miss Ohio, and she is going to Miss America. Everybody vote for her, whatever. You can go on Facebook if you have a Facebook account and vote every day for Miss Ohio. So there you go. So she's going to be doing that. But let me go back to the beginning of the chat here. It's usually easy when you don't have a lot of people watching, so I don't miss too much. Looks like they were kind of having a side conversation there about various things. Let's see. Arranging meetups. Let's see if there's any questions. So far, most of it's about a meetup in the UK or Holland or someplace. It looks like apparent path of the sun at the edge of our vision. Yeah. Like I said, I've looked at some of my past videos. I've already done a lot of sun videos, so I won't go over that again. But yeah, thanks for that. And you can take any pictures you want. Just, if you would, direct people to my stuff so they can see all the rest of it in context, of course. Yeah, I think it's pretty good evidence that we're not going around the sun. There's so many problems, as I've gone over in my other videos of sun videos. And I have made a playlist of cosmology, so there's a handy collection there if you want. And I will add this one to it. I will also add it to Bible and Christianity playlist because it's prophecy as well. So, yeah, and Sun and Moon Group, we've been, there's a guy, Chris Monk there, who's also doing more of the modeling of magnetic issues that can also, as I said in mine, it doesn't have to be optical lensing. It can be magnetic lensing. And I described the shape of the lensing that would be required in any map model to make it work, explain the sun's path on a given day. And not a season or a year, even just a given day. The sun's motion is very telling about a lot of things. And we have to eliminate what doesn't work. The sun is like a wheel. Yep, there's a video on from way back, at least a year ago, I think, on Taboo Conspiracy Channel, where Jibby put together a video at that time with the song "Wheels on the Sky Keep on Turning," where because Taboo Conspiracy guy Rothbard was taking videos of the sun's motion, and even back then, and watching how it turns like a clock. So this is just, it's better to have confirmation from many different people working independently. That lends credibility to it. As far as the penumbra on the eclipse, look at my earlier video about eclipses, and I explained that one thing I only briefly showed here about how shadows and lights work, and that the size of shadows it would be difficult on the ground to tell where a penumbra was compared to the umbra. It would be really hard on the ground. But to my thinking, I would think that if you saw a partial eclipse, you must be in the penumbra. I'm not sure if that's true, but that's just what I'm thinking. And I was in the partial eclipse, so technically I should have been in it. And I'm in southwestern Ohio. All of Ohio was in the penumbra, allegedly. And so whether that matches up with shadow size of something that's a fourth the size of the Earth, that, you know, I went into all that. So maybe look at my earlier videos. Yeah, you wouldn't see it by looking at the sun. You just wouldn't. So, I mean, sometimes there's just a black part that's different from black of the sky. I'm not sure what you mean there. The thing is that when you're looking at a high contrast object of any kind, photographically, you're going to get a stark difference because it has to set the exposure for the primary object. And so it will darken it so that it isn't blasted out by just a white, whatever the shape of the object is. And so there's a lot of photographic issues going on, and we have to be careful when we process these images. And that's why I did that experiment with a rubber ball in one of my earlier videos. I showed that you can create the nothingness on the dark side of a half-lit ball with a flashlight. So that doesn't mean the ball isn't there anymore, but I did that just to show that the nothingness in that kind of a picture doesn't prove by itself that there's nothing there on the dark part of the moon. Yeah, distances and shapes and all that, that's just, you know, what I was trying to illustrate. Yeah, the scale, like I said, if you can do the sun, moon, and Earth to scale by remembering that physically with the physics of light and optics, you can duplicate that easy enough with a ball that's one size, another ball that's 4 times that size, put them the distance being 30 large ball diameters between the two balls, and then put a light just behind the little ball, which is acting as the moon, and the big ball is the Earth. Put a light behind the moon that's maybe only slightly larger than it and slightly behind it. And you could do this by putting a big light, but cutting out a piece of cardboard or something with a hole that's roughly the size of the little ball, the moon. And put that all in a dark room and just turn on the flashlight and see what happens with the shadow and how the shadow moves. And I've showed in an earlier video that the only way to make a shadow move the opposite way that the shadow casting body is, in our case the moon, is if the light behind it moves. You cannot do that by spinning where the shadow is hitting, which is by spinning the Earth, which is why the standard model cannot work, because it says that the sun only appears to move. The sun is not moving. It only appears to move because the Earth is spinning. And you cannot make the shadow go the opposite way. I demonstrated that I even put on a white lab coat for the occasion. So look up that video, and it's fairly recent. It's in my cosmology playlist, where I prove that you cannot have the shadow move the opposite way, west to east, unless you move the light. The sun must be moving in that scenario. There's no other way to do it. So yeah, even with 30 Earth diameters, you're going to need a fairly large room, but it could be done, you know, depending on the size of the large ball. You know, it doesn't have to be that big. You could easily do this in any average room. You know, go corner to corner if you have to. So, yeah, that's all you have to do is change the sizes. But it doesn't have to be a pinhead. You have to, like I said, I've got a ball that, say you have a large ball that's 6 inches in diameter, then you multiply 6 inches by 30. Okay, you have 180 inches. I did that in my head real quick, but anyway, 30 of those, and then you put your little ball, which should be 1/4 the size. 6 inches isn't a good calculate in your head number, but 1/4 of 6, and have a ball that size. That's all you need is 2 balls, or one's 4 times the size of the other, and a light behind the little ball that is about the same size as the little ball. You know, cut out a circle in cardboard, and there's your sun, moon, Earth simulation. There's no reason that doesn't work. So otherwise there couldn't be an eclipse if that didn't work. It couldn't be a solar eclipse. So you can do this at home. Yes, you can. I don't know as much about dimensions if we want to think of other dimensions as simply, I mean, I've always conceded that the supernatural realm is a dimension. You know, beyond the third dimension somewhere is a supernatural realm. I don't consider time or space so-called dimensions. They're not dimensions. That's just standard cosmology double talk. Let's see, the rolling of the sun and moon is called field rotation. The camera is not an equatorial mount. That's the thing I dealt with in one of the comment stream in one of my videos. And the thing is that I said, even with, if you have your camera horizontal, as I've had, the rotation should be counterclockwise. And if somebody does an experiment to prove otherwise, that's fine. I'm okay. I haven't done that experiment yet, but I do have a friend that I think he's going to try when he gets a sunny day, has the same kind of camera, and he will angle it and instead of keeping it horizontal and follow the sun and see what happens to the rotation. So the cause of the rotation is up for debate right now. The fact of the rotation is not. I mean, I just showed in my little time lapse that I made from yesterday that the rotation is always clockwise, and when its speed changes, the ball model can't account for that at the very least. It was slowly turning in the hours before and after the midday, but in the hours around midday, it very greatly slowed down. And there's really no good way to explain that in the standard cosmological model, because how do you account? Is the Earth spinning slower at that point? No, you have some kind of lensing going on, can't be denied. And if there's lensing, then things just got a lot more complicated. And it isn't as simplistic as we're told that the Earth must be spinning. Like I said, you cannot have a spinning Earth making the sun only appear to move, because otherwise the west to east shadow of the eclipse would be impossible. You must move the light. So anyway, that's why I said all that. So we'll see about as far as camera being horizontal, whether that causes rotation and whether the rotation is going the right way. I'm guessing it won't be, but we'll see by experiment. Let's see what else in the chat here. Yeah, let's see. Extraplanar phasing technology. I'm not sure what that's about. 1 Corinthians 15. Yep. As Christians in all of this conspiracy realm, we need to keep our focus on what really matters, and that is turning people, especially people who are waking up to the reality of a creator, to the right God, because there's a very concerted effort by the forces of evil to turn us away from the one true God. And this doesn't surprise me at all. I was telling somebody yesterday that the reason they would do this is, letting flat earth out or whatever it is to turn people from atheism, but away from the one true God, because Satan doesn't believe in atheists. Satan doesn't want atheism. He wants people to worship him as God. He's always wanted to be God. You can find that way early in the Old Testament, where he is, Lucifer, whatever, if you don't like that word, son of the morning, who has said, I will be like the Most High, and he is described as one who walked among the precious stones of God in the garden of God. No human ever did that. So it's clearly also, as well as a description of the king of Tyrus, it's also otherworldly and description of Satan. And if you want to use the word Lucifer, it's just a name. It's okay. And, comes from the Latin, but irrelevant. We got a name. He has many names: the dragon, the serpent, the devil, the accuser, all these names, but they all describe the same entity and being Satan. And so, and Satan, by the way, means adversary. And the fact is that we as Christians in the conspiracy realm have to understand that Satan wants to be God, wants the world to worship him. That is why the beast/Antichrist at the middle of the tribulation, as I mentioned, will desecrate the temple, set up an idol, and declare himself God and sit in the temple as God. And Paul describes this as well, that he calls him the son of perdition, the man of sin, whatever you want to call him. This person is the figure of Daniel 9, who will desecrate the temple and break a 7-year treaty halfway through. And so Satan will not tolerate atheists. Satan will not tolerate atheists. That's what the mark of the beast is all about. You will worship him as God. That's what the mark is all about. And there will be no place for atheists then either. So that's what's going on there. And we as Christians need to understand this, that there's a reason why people are being woken up to the reality of this being a created realm. And we as Christians are seriously, quote, pardon the pun, dropping the ball, in that we are not being assertive enough to counter these false ideas of who God is, so that they will not be deceived when this false God appears and sits in the temple. We know the one true God, the one who predicted all of this, and they'll see this if they remember anything about Revelation and this prophecy sequence, and remember that there is a one true God, the one who created us, that Satan has been running this realm ever since Adam and Eve handed over the title deed to the earth in the Garden of Eden. That's why it's so bad and messed up, and why the whole cosmos, the whole of nature, has been, as the Bible describes it, groaning and moaning in travail, because waiting for the time when we would be revealed, which is, of course, the end times, when all this death and suffering is done away with. And so we have to make sure that people know who the true creator is. And just as I've said before, just as conspiracy theorists have noticed that flat earth is the one conspiracy you're not allowed to talk about, or you're ostracized and laughed and mocked by other conspiracy theorists, even the ufologists, or followers of Sitchin, or whoever they are, Greys and aliens. You can believe in Thor, you can believe in anything you want, but the Bible. That's the one thing singled out for exclusion. So if flat earth is true because it's the one thing you can't talk about as a conspiracy theorist, then why isn't it spiritually true that the one thing you can't believe, the one God you can't believe in, is the God of the Bible? That should be a wake-up call for flat earthers to say, look, we're the ostracized group. Who else is the ostracized groups? That would be the Christians. Even though there are still many Christians in flat earth, from the get-go, people with popular channels have started by attacking Christianity and the Bible. So if they rose to fame on that platform, rode that wave, then ask yourself why they didn't pick on any other religion. They can offer excuses, but there's no mistaking, no denying the fact that a bunch of different people started that way, trashing the Bible, gaining followers on that account. And we as Christians need to step up and stand for the truth, because why else are we here? It's like back in the book of Esther, where her uncle Mordecai, she was debating whether to go to King Xerxes with the truth of a plot that was being made against her people, the Jews. And he said, who knows but that you were born for a time like this? That's where we are. The end is near. I don't care how far away it really is. None of us knows how short life is, and we need as Christians to step up our game and to be bold about it, and not sit quietly while people, spew nonsense about the Bible and terrible untruths about it. They haven't done their homework. That's why I did look at my Babylon video for details on Rome and how it didn't write the Bible. And I've had people I've explained this to over and over, had them watch my videos, and they still go, I'd find them later on some panel going, oh, the Jesuits or Francis Bacon wrote the Bible. That is so hilariously stupid that I just won't talk to some of those people anymore, because they know better. I mean, Francis Bacon, he only, if anything, had to do with the King James Bible, which is not the original Bible. Why, at least 1,600 years. There were English Bibles before that, before Francis Bacon existed. The Bible was completed before Josephus existed. I mean, he lived in the 1st century. He was born after the death of Christ, and everything was pretty much written. There might have been a few things that were left to do. Like I said, Revelation was written in about 90 to 95 AD, and that's overlapping the time of Josephus. So all of those, the people I've talked to, I've shown this stuff to, who still insist that the Jesuits, who didn't exist, or Francis Bacon, who didn't exist, had anything to do with the Bible, are deliberately blind and ignorant and being stupid about it and evil about it. And I just won't have anything to do. I won't waste my time throwing pearls to those people, as Jesus said, because when you hear the truth and you throw it away that hard, you're not wasting any more of my time. that's what I think about all that. But we need to step up and Palestine. Palestina was a derogatory term made up by the Romans to diss the Jews after they were exiled from the area. The Palestinians are the Philistines. That's their original name, was Philistines. And the area was Canaan originally, and the Jews had every right to be there. The Philistines were against God. They were people who had dissed God. God threw them out and replaced them with the Jews. And that's the so-called modern Palestinians are Jordanians, and the Jordanians betrayed them and abandoned them and used them as a political pawn. You really got to read up on your history on that sort of thing, and the Balfour Declaration and what really happened. I've done some blogs on that. If you go to, let me get you the link real quick. Let me look up my blog on that. Hold on just a second. If you want to know the truth about Israel and Palestine and the Balfour Declaration, let me see if I can find that real quick. I also have one on the real history of the Crusades. I think it's this one. Yeah, here we go. Let me give you that link, Erwin, so you can learn the truth about Palestine. So there you go. I hope you're still here. There's only 9 people watching, but at any rate, there's an article you might want to read on the topic. And you can't just believe something. You can't believe Israel is a title. You can't just say that and believe it and decide it's true. Israel is the name God gave to Jacob. He changed his name from Jacob. Jacob is the grandson of Abraham. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. That's the grandfather, father, son. And Jacob's name was changed by God to Israel, which means father of nations. Or no, that was Abraham. Israel means he struggles with God. And that is where the name of Israel came from. And it was, lands are typically named after the chief of the tribes or whoever, the progenitors. And so Israel's area was named after Jacob, Israel. That's where the name came from. The word Hebrew means wanderer and was first attributed to Abraham, I believe. So that goes way back. Jew simply means Judean. That's the word that's in the New Testament all over it. It means Judean. And Judean did not mean by the first century merely one tribe, the tribe of Judah. It did not mean that anymore. It was the original area of the tribe of Judah, parts of it. I mean, that it's bigger than that even today. But in the first century, people were called Judeans in that area. That was the area of Judea. And that was just the primary tribe. And the New Testament indicates that all 12 tribes were there. And there's just no escaping the fact. I've done videos on it and research. And so I don't just believe it. I know. As the favorite saying of people today, I don't want to believe I know. Well, I know. I've done the research. I don't just believe that this was a name or a title. There's a history behind it. And you got to look these things up. So Israel and Babylon, I have a video on Babylon. Look that one up. It's a very close look at Nimrod and Babylonian religion, the nation and the religious views, and how it is the root of all the false gods that went by different names, such as Tammuz, and we have Nimrod, and we have all sorts of names that you can trace there. I did it for you. Go and watch it. So you can't, here again, people want to believe things about the past or about the Jews. And then these are often the same people who say, I don't believe I know. Well, they believe that without knowing. And so I encourage you to watch some of that stuff. I've done the research. So let's look again at the chat. Let's see. Rolling up here a little bit. Looks like some personal issues were there. Somebody got slandered. Well, join the club of slander. I've had several well-known names make hit pieces about me over the course of the last couple of years. So yeah, it happens. You get slandered. So it's not just a name, Israel. It's not just a title. Oh, it looks like I rolled too far again. The thing does that to me. Let's see. Mormonism. Yeah, it's a false gospel, and they got to be having a tough time with flat Earth, I have to say, because they believe in evolution thoroughly, as far as with a twist. They believe that every good Mormon male, this is a very patriarchal, sexist religion, you have to be a guy to be a god. They believe that they will become gods, they will have planets or universes of their own, and populate them with their spirit wives, which is why they believe in having many wives. Don't let them tell you otherwise. They just don't believe it out loud to us outside of them. But anyway, Israel's not a title. The Mormons are wrong. And let me say, yeah, it doesn't matter how nice they are. There are nice Satanists, for crying out loud. You know, it doesn't mean that they believe the right things. So anyway, picture of Miss Ohio. Just Google Miss Ohio and see I guess you call them candidate, but contestants, that's the word I'm looking for. Just look for, I forget what the website is called, but there's a Miss Ohio website, Miss America website, I'm sorry. You can see her at the Miss Ohio website too, but Miss America, they have websites. Of course, she's pretty, they're all pretty, but she's also a most amazing person. She graduated the Ohio State University, not long ago with a bachelor's degree in architecture with, I think, a 3.8 average. So she's not stupid by any stretch. She's employed in an architectural firm. She can't call herself an architect because she hasn't done certain things. You don't just become an architect right out of college, but she's very good at presenting architectural plans and critiquing plans, and she's done a lot of work for injured athletes. That's one of her main charity things or whatever. I'm not into all that stuff. At any rate, she's also very talented. She is an injured athlete herself. She had her heart set on being a gymnast, and her body couldn't take it, and she had to give it up. It was very hard, and so she got into these pageants and things, which are very demanding, and took her 5 years to get to this point. So these are not just beauty queens. They have met a lot of stringent requirements, and so go vote for Miss Ohio. Anyway, I don't care what state you're from. So see y'all later, and people who have left already, sorry about that. I didn't see that yet. Let's see. Penumbra is just a partial eclipse. That's what I was thinking too, that the penumbra is the partial eclipse. But I mean, you can see your name is the new number 2. Okay. At any rate, I did a video on that, on eclipses and shadows. Go look it up, and you can see what I calculated about where I think the models go wrong. When they model this thing, I think they're altering the size of the sun deliberately to make a much bigger shadow. But here again, even the so-called satellite photos of it the shadow is too small. And I'm not the only one who has said so. And there are people who've crunched through the math and calculated that the shadow is just totally the wrong size. But yeah, I'm back to the slander, and I had to go way back before that. I have to roll very slowly through the chat or I miss stuff. It just jumps on too far. Yeah, it happens. I've been betrayed 1,000 times. I've told people even before I got on YouTube and things that I got so many holes from backstabbing in me that I whistle when the wind blows. So it happens. If you stand up for anything and voice an opinion people don't like, you're going to get it. Yeah, Christian women, especially, if you want to be downtrodden, people talk about racial segregation and racial racism, but sexism is by far a worse problem, and there's no larger, more persistently discriminated against group than women. And the male rights advocates will scream bloody murder because of a recent anomaly in history where women actually are treated as full human beings. And sometimes, yes, the pendulum goes too far the other way, and there are injustices being done. But you know what? We've had to put up with severe injustice as women for all of human history, pretty much. So I don't want to hear any whining from men about losing privileges and entitlements and being first in line. And Jesus said, by the way, the first shall be last. So we're all supposed to be humble as Christians. Humility and being the lowest servant is where you will find the leaders. And that's what Jesus said, not me. So putting down women is not a smart thing to do, especially since it is the teaching of division that we're warned about. Teaching division is something bad, and there's nothing that rips the body of Christ in half more than the teaching that somehow women have to defer to men unilaterally. And when the Bible says otherwise, it says mutual submission, defer to each other, submit to each other, and there's no exceptions. And I know the proof text, and I've done the videos. Look at the You Are One series for that. So I've dealt with all that, and I also have books. I wrote a book, and I know the New Testament as well as I do because of that issue. So if anybody wants to give me grief about it, they can just go to the stuff I've already put out. I'm not interested in talking to them anymore about it. All right, thanks. Yeah, this is, like I said, I'm not doing regular weekly church hangouts because they weren't functioning as a church, because a church to function needs 2 or 3 together participating, and there wasn't the participation part on panel especially, and chat participation is fine, but like I said, we had fewer people than we have right now most of the time, so that wasn't working, and I tried it all summer long. It went I had 13 episodes of that, so I decided this was a call, that God wants me someplace else. And so I'm just winging it. When I have something to say, I do a video, and I do it in the mornings when my house is quiet. That just works best for me. So, and I'm on other hangouts, like Sun and Moon Group had me on once. They might have me back. So that's always a good sign when somebody invites you back for a good reason and not because they enjoy making fun of you or something. They were very nice and gave me a platform, and I'm hoping someday we can talk about spiritual things there too as well. It was mostly all scientific. So any rate, sorry about no notice ahead of time. I didn't have any notice either, really. I just kind of, went with it. And let's see, looking at the chat some more. Yeah, Mormonism, they think that this is somehow, that's hell for women. Eternal pregnancy and childbirth and cranking out babies for all eternity. I don't care if you are immaterial. I mean, you got to be material in some way if they're having babies. And being eternally barefoot and pregnant and ignorant, it doesn't sound like heaven for a woman. It's heaven only for men. There's a lot of parallels between Mormonism and Islam. They're visited. Some guy is picked out because he's so special and righteous by some angel who shows him golden plates. People don't know that Muhammad was shown golden plates. He was taken up to heaven allegedly and shown golden plates and told to restore the broken religion. And then he gets a few followers, and then they make war. They complain about being persecuted because they betray people and make war against them, and then they complain about the backlash. And then there's predecessor, after they die, they're not predecessors, but followers who are left squabble and fight amongst themselves for the new leader, and then they make up a bunch of things, and all these parallels, and both of them have in common, of course, extreme sexism, where for Islam, the males get to go to heaven and have 70 virgins that stay virgins somehow. They believe that. And in Mormonism, they marry as many women as they can, even symbolically, quote unquote, wink, wink. We know that there are secret temple rituals that, by golly, they have a lot to do with Freemasonry. And they seal people in temples for all eternity. And the women just doesn't have a whole lot to say about it, especially in the earlier days. Just like in Islam, the women are treated very little above animals, and which is why it just ground my gears to hear a Christian online say that sometimes a woman has to be tamed or broken like a stallion. That there's nothing more demeaning a Christian man could ever say to Christian women than that they need to be broken like stallions sometimes. That is so beyond evil. I cannot, I won't associate with people like that. But it's been said within the last 6 months in my hearing on a panel, a live hangout. And so I have a serious issue with that. And any of these religious views that make women merely playthings for men, or even if they try to be nice, it's like being in a gilded cage. You could make the nicest cage for a bird, with gold overlaid everything. You can give it everything it wants, every food, every toy, as big as cage as you want, but it's still a cage. Christians don't belong in cages. Jesus came to open the prison doors, not paint them in gold. And that's what the teaching in Christianity of male supremacism does. It puts women in a gilded cage. And there's no escaping this fact. And any Christian man who believes that is a Christian man I cannot fellowship with. And that's all there is to it. I have to make a stand. So at any rate, my cousin is, yes, or not my cousin, my niece is Miss Ohio. She's my niece. And yes, she is a Christian. She's a very strong Christian and is not shy about, there are certain rules she must obey when being in these pageants, but everybody knows she's a Christian. And she's gone through a lot of hardship along this path, and it's not been easy, especially right now, recently. I mean, she's going to Miss America, and the week after that is a memorial service for her uncle, who just passed away last week. So it's not easy. And yes, she is a follower of Jesus. So, yeah, she's my niece. Thanks for that, Victoria. And I hate when I just scroll a little bit and this thing rolls way too far. But yeah, she's awesome. So, yes, she is. And yeah, you could join me. Right now, it's lunchtime and I'm tired and I need a break for a while. So even if you want to do a hangout later, I'd be happy to get on and we could do one. And but yeah, even next time I do a hangout. Right now, is that I've been going for, it says 2 hours there. I think it's a little bit longer than that. But yeah, Joseph Smith with a Freemason. Yeah, they don't allow that publicly anymore, but I can guarantee you, and there is a sect of Mormonism that does that still, and they get thrown in jail, but it's horrific what, there's been documentaries on it, what the women go through. They call them sister wives. Especially in American TV, people have heard of that, sister wives. That's what they call it. I mean, and one woman told about how hard it is for her to listen. She can hear her husband making love to one of the other wives. And that's got it. I mean, how does that make a person feel? If you're not a piece of property at that point, I don't know what is. And some women like that, just as there have been some slaves who enjoyed their slavery. It's a terrible crime against humanity. And even though they technically don't allow it, it's in their teachings from the start. So yeah, they do it in secret. Let's see, the sealing of the temple, but yeah, their temple rituals, look into that. There are documentaries. They are not open about a lot of things. I mean, if you go to a Mormon website and try to look up some of their teachings, you won't find them there, and I know they're there. But they just don't put them all on their websites. But yeah, there's a lot they admit. But for example, one person we met once said that they believe in one God and that Jesus Christ is our Savior. But there's fine print with that they didn't say, which is they believe that there is God of this realm, but there are millions of other gods of other realms. They don't tell you that. And they believe that Jesus is the savior of people here in this realm. What they mean is that's just one realm of millions or billions, and that someday they expect to have their own, at least the good men. So what they tell you and what they mean can be often two different things. So they don't always admit it either. And even though they have changed their outward appearance, that's all it is pretty much. So there may not be evil intent by the average Mormon, but I can assure you that there is evil intent behind the doors. I've also heard, can't prove, but heard of some of the satanic rituals that they will do in the Mormon church and torture children. So, and these sister wives tell of the mistreatment of wives and children at the hands of Mormon men who are in good standing in the Mormon church. And, that a woman who rejects any of these things is shunned, but a man can be kept in good standing provided he does certain things. And so, yeah, it's really, you really have to dig, because Everything is not as it appears. And it isn't just Mormons either. Look at the Duggar family. What a disaster. What a terrible blight on the body of Christ. I know there's family and friends who still support them, but it can't be denied what was going on. Look up the Duggars. I think I had an article on that in one of my blogs. But it is, anytime you have people, whether for their skin color or their gender, being, and when I say gender, I mean male and female. I don't mean any of those other stupid crap that denies biology. But I mean, you're a male or female by your genes. You either have an XX or an XY chromosomes, end of story. And but if you judge people, prejudge them, and put them into a restrictive box based upon their genetic qualities, you are not being Christ-like. You are denying what Jesus came to do. You don't understand what Jesus came to do, just as the Hebrew Roots movement doesn't understand what Jesus came to do either. And that's my opinion, and I'm sticking with it. And if they can say their convictions and say Yahushua or anything else that sounds like somebody's sneezing, I don't mean to diss the real names of God or anything, the Hebrew names, but I'm saying these people are making a mockery of the gospel when they try to put us under the law, or when they try to divide the body of Christ in half, even whether it's marriage or the church, I don't care. Hierarchy is hierarchy, and restriction and privilege and entitlement are what they are, and they're against everything Jesus came to do. But anyway, yes, it is satanic because it denies the gospel, which is there is one God, not millions of God and not millions of realms. There is one God, one earth, one heaven, and Mormon teaches the opposite, and this is a lie from Satan. That's why it's satanic. It's not that they openly worship Satan, but every false religion unknowingly worships Satan. That's why we call it satanic. But because it is. Every false religion, Babylonian religion, where all false religion began, is satanic to the core. They were, eventually you come to the point where you understand that Apollyon, destroyer, is mentioned in Revelation and will rise again. So, Mormons also believe that Satan and Lucifer were spirit brothers of the, procreated by God and his spirit wife. That's what they believe. This is total blasphemy. And they call it Christianity. This is why it's so insidious. And that's why, these things are so very deceptive. At any rate, they do believe that. Look up Mormonism, spirit brother, Satan, and Jesus, and you'll find these things. They believe that. They don't believe that's bad. They believe Jesus was the procreated son of God and a spirit mother, and that Satan was his brother, procreated the same way. Not created, but procreated. The Bible says that Lucifer was an angel, which is a created being, and Jesus is not a created being. And so Mormon is twisting and blaspheming God, and this is what's satanic about it. I don't care how thick the veneer of Christian piety they put over it. There are good atheists. There are good Buddhists. There are good Muslims even. But that doesn't change the fact that the teachings they believe that are blasphemous against God are satanic in origin. So we have to be careful to explain these things. But it is. And like I said, I'm hungry. I'm tired. My voice is starting to give out. I need to put it down, and I'd be happy to be on other panels. I like to talk about spiritual things. I think they're much more important than science things. I believe that science is, as one person put it in history, thinking God's thoughts after him. So there's nothing wrong with pursuing science, and it can lead people to God. So it's a worthwhile pursuit, but it isn't our primary focus. As far as harshness goes, truth can be harsh. It's the truth. It's a fact. I'm not making stuff up. I have studied these things. I've read the Book of Mormon. I've read the Quran. I've read the Book of Enoch. I have not read the Vedas. That's just only so many hours in the day. But I have at least looked outside my religion as opposed to the people who trash the Bible and say, well, I don't have to look outside that one religion. Well, it's not even your religion. A, you can't tell me how to be a good Christian. B, you don't know the Bible like I do. And C, if that's not what you're about, why do you keep talking about it? You know, one religion all the time ever. If you're going to talk about religion, study them all. If you're going to just talk about Christianity, fine. It's more honest. But when they say religion and all they ever talk about is one, then they're being ignorant and being dishonest with themselves, I think. But yeah, the truth can be harsh. It can. And we're just saying things that are true about Mormonism and Islam and things like that. And so, like I said, I'll even be harsh with my own fellow Christians who believe that because of their flesh, whether it's because of its color or its reproductive organs, that they have retained certain entitlements from God. That's where the problem is. That's the teaching of division. And if we could give it up in the Western world on skin color, then we had better learn to give it up on gender. And this would be consistent. It's hypocritical to do otherwise, to keep one and drop the other. Well, even Satanists would think that what you just said there in the chat is harsh because they believe that they don't overtly worship Satan. They don't do rituals and this and that. That they, I think actually, you know, there's divisions in them too. They will say they don't do these things. Of course, who knows whether they're even telling the truth, because Satan is the father of lies. So why they believe Satan and why we should believe Satan is you know, kind of a silly thing, because people who base their religion on someone who is known as the father of lies, they believe is telling the truth. And this gets into why on my Babylon video again about Gnosticism and Luciferianism being two sides of the same coin. Gnosticism turns everything upside down. It turns God, Yahweh, into the bad guy, the demiurge, the bumbling creator who messed up. And it turns Lucifer into the light being who is trying to help us and show us the truth and give us the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They only call it the tree of knowledge, which twists it. It is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is mean experiencing evil, which God never wanted us to do. And he was trying to save us from all that has happened since then. And then, of course, God gets the blame for everything everybody but God has done. And that's how Gnosticism and Luciferianism are. And they turn everything upside down. And the other religions are just chips off the old block, so to speak. They all twist the truth and put their own spin on it. And as I think it's attributed to Voltaire, saying that in the beginning, God created man in his own image, and ever since then, man has returned the favor, trying to get us to say, creating God in man's image. And people think that about Christianity too, but it's simply not true when you look at the details. And yeah, people at the bottom, whether it's Mormonism or Freemasonry or even Flat Earth, a lot of times, conspiracy people, they also can be sheep who are fooled by the people at the top. I believe the earth is not a spinning ball. And so don't, you know, anybody misunderstand me, but I'm saying that the people at the top of most things are withholding secrets from the people at the bottom, who to them are useful idiots. And that's their term. I think it was a communist term, Lenin or somebody had said that. Anyway, I got to go, and I, you know, hope this was helpful and that you can spread it around. Who knows what the real watch count was or the real thumbs count, but the thing is participation, and you can go get that by who's in the chat, how many people comment later. I rarely get any comments on my videos unless they're from people who want to just mock, in which case eventually I block them. And I wish there was a way you could block people from a channel from further comments rather than everything they said before, but can't do that. And I won't have them ruining my comment streams. But anyway, hope you found it helpful. Thanks for everybody who came. And there's a lot about spirituality that I wish could be talked about in the Flat Earth community that isn't being, because everybody who's against the Bible or wants to believe something, anything else, ABC, anything but Christianity, they get a platform on all the big channels. We don't. Anyway, I see that there's buffering for some reason. I'm not sure why it started buffering all of a sudden, but it's YouTube, and I got to go. Thanks everybody for coming, and we'll see y'all later. I need a break. I'll I'll look around for see what's running after that. There certainly wasn't anything running this morning, which, by the way, another pet peeve. The 24/7 channels have become rerun TV to me. People go to Hangouts to talk, to listen to people on the panel. I know the chats are nice, the side chats, but they are fleeting. They don't last. They aren't recorded. And people want to hear people talk. And it's now become just like cable TV, where you see endless reruns of other things that happened before. And I wish they would stop that trend. But anyway, I got to go. See you guys. Thanks for coming.